The discovery. Dr. Natasha Harrison stared at her monitor in disbelief, rechecking the calculations for the fourth time. The gravitational readings from the Mauna Kea Observatory couldn't be right. They suggested something massive had just appeared near Saturn's orbit, something that bent spacetime itself. Dr. Kaur, she called out to her research partner. Can you verify these readings? Dr. Priya Kaur rushed over, her usual composed demeanor cracking as she reviewed the data. This can't be possible, she whispered. A black hole doesn't just materialize out of nowhere. The energy requirements alone. The two women worked through the night, verifying and re-verifying their findings. By morning, observatories across the globe were confirming what they discovered. A black hole roughly 5 solar masses in size had somehow appeared in our solar system. Worse, it was moving in a controlled trajectory toward Earth. Within days, the International Astronomical Union called an emergency meeting. Dr. Harrison found herself in a virtual conference room with the world's leading experts in astrophysics, quantum mechanics, and planetary defense. The object's velocity and trajectory suggest artificial manipulation, Dr. Harrison explained to the assembled faces. Natural black holes don't change direction or accelerate like this one does. Something or someone is controlling it. Admiral James Walsh of the United Nations Space Defense Council leaned forward. Are you suggesting this is a weapon, Doctor? I'm suggesting this is first contact, she replied. The precision of its movements, the timing of its appearance, this isn't random. This is communication. The room erupted in heated debate. Some argued for immediate military preparation, others for attempting communication. Through it all, Dr. Harrison kept running simulations, trying to understand the black hole's behavior. There was a pattern to its movement, almost like Morse code written in gravitational waves. The first effects were subtle, slight variations in local gravity, disrupted satellite orbits, and unusual aurora displays. But as the black hole drew closer, its influence grew stronger. Time itself began to fluctuate in unpredictable ways. Dr. Harrison worked from her lab at MIT, coordinating with teams worldwide. They discovered that the gravitational distortions followed mathematical sequences, complex but not random. Each pattern lasted exactly 108 minutes before repeating, a number that couldn't be coincidental. It's a primer, she explained to Admiral Walsh during a private briefing. Like the Arecibo message, but written in gravity instead of radio waves. Someone is trying to teach us their language. Walsh rubbed his temples. How long until it reaches Earth's orbit? 14 months, assuming its current trajectory holds. But that's not what worries me. She pulled up a new simulation. The temporal distortions are getting stronger. We're seeing time dilation effects that shouldn't be possible at this distance. If we don't figure out how to communicate with whatever's controlling it. She left the sentence unfinished. They both knew the stakes. A black hole passing too close to Earth wouldn't just cause destruction, it would unravel the very fabric of spacetime around the planet. The UN Security Council convened in emergency session. Plans were drawn up for a mission to intercept the black hole, to study it up close and perhaps find a way to communicate with its controllers. They would need the best minds humanity had to offer, working together against impossible odds. Dr. Harrison stared out her office window at the night sky. Somewhere out there, an impossible object was heading toward Earth, carrying with it either humanity's greatest discovery or its final moments. And she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something obvious in the patterns, some crucial piece that would make sense of it all. The answer came to her at 3 a.m., as she reviewed the gravitational wave patterns for the 100th time. The sequences weren't just mathematical, they were coordinates. Specific points in spacetime, mapped out in a four-dimensional grid. Whatever was controlling the black hole wasn't just sending a message, they were providing instructions. She immediately contacted Admiral Walsh. I need to be on that mission, she said without preamble. The patterns, their navigation points. Whoever sent this thing is showing us exactly where we need to go. Temporal distortions. The mission briefing room at NASA's Johnson Space Center hummed with tension as Dr. Harrison presented her findings. 3 months had passed since the black hole's discovery, and its effects were becoming impossible to ignore. The temporal distortions are following the same mathematical sequence as the gravitational waves, she explained, gesturing to the holographic display. But they're not just random fluctuations. They're creating a specific pattern of spacetime distortions, like ripples in a pond. Behind her, screens displayed live feeds from around the world. In Mumbai, a city block had aged 50 years overnight, buildings crumbling as decades passed in hours. In Buenos Aires, a park had become frozen in time, pigeons suspended mid-flight, leaves hanging motionless in the air. The effects were spreading, following the coded sequences hidden in the black hole's emissions. Admiral Walsh studied the reports with a grim expression. Construction of the horizon is ahead of schedule. The Russians and Chinese have agreed to share their advanced propulsion technology. The Europeans are providing the quantum communications array. But Dr. Harrison, we need to know, can we survive this? She took a deep breath. The temporal effects are accelerating. At the current rate, we'll see complete temporal breakdown in major population centers within 8 months. Before the black hole even reaches Earth orbit. Dr. Raj Patel, the quantum mechanics expert who would be joining the mission, spoke up. The distortions aren't random destruction. They're too precise. It's as if something is testing our spacetime. Probing it for weaknesses. Colonel Diana Rodriguez, their mission commander, crossed her arms. Or preparing it for something. The horizon itself was a marvel of human engineering and desperate cooperation. Built in orbit using components from a dozen nations, it represented humanity's most advanced attempt at deep space travel. Its rotating habitation rings provided artificial gravity. Its experimental quantum drive, originally competing designs from different space agencies, had been merged into something entirely new. Dr. Harrison spent the next weeks training with the crew. Colonel Rodriguez ran them through endless simulations, preparing for every possibility they could imagine. Dr. Patel worked to refine their sensors, developing new ways to measure and analyze the black hole's emissions. The temporal distortions grew worse. In London, a temporal wave aged Big Ben 5 centuries in minutes, rust eating through ancient metal as history accelerated. In Tokyo, people reported seeing echoes of themselves, shadow versions moving through moments that hadn't happened yet. Dr. Harrison worked through the data, finding new patterns in the chaos. The coordinates hidden in the gravitational waves were becoming clearer, forming a three-dimensional path through space. But more than that, they seemed to be describing something, a structure or machine of impossible scale. During a rare break, she found herself in the observation dome of the space station, watching Earth rotate below. The temporal distortions were visible now from orbit, shimmering waves of distorted spacetime rippling across continents. Beautiful, in a terrifying way, said Colonel Rodriguez, floating up beside her. Like watching a storm roll in. The patterns, Dr. Harrison said softly. They're not just coordinates. They're building instructions. Whatever's controlling that black hole, they're trying to teach us how to build something. Something big. Before Rodriguez could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. A new temporal wave was forming, larger than any before. They watched in horror as it spread across the Pacific, a ripple of distorted time visible from space. Dr. Patel's voice crackled over the intercom. The wave's frequency matches the black hole's emissions exactly. It's not just affecting Earth anymore, it's changing the structure of spacetime itself. We need to launch. Now. Admiral Walsh's authorization came minutes later. The Horizon would launch in 12 hours, months ahead of schedule. As the crew made final preparations, Dr. Harrison made one last check of her calculations. The coordinates were clear now, forming a path not just through space, but through time itself. Whatever they were heading toward, it wasn't just a black hole. It was a door. And something on the other side was waiting for them to open it. The journey begins. The horizon lifted away from Earth's orbit with a soundless burst of quantum energy, its innovative drive system creating ripples in spacetime that matched the patterns they'd been studying. The crew of 12 represented Earth's finest minds and strongest wills, chosen not just for their expertise but for their ability to face the unknown. Dr. Harrison monitored the quantum fluctuations from her station on the bridge. The closer they got to the black hole, the stronger the temporal effects became. Time moved differently throughout the ship, food in the mess hall aged weeks in minutes, while some corridors seemed frozen in moments that stretched for hours. Primary drive systems functioning within expected parameters, reported Lieutenant Youssef Ibrahim, their propulsion specialist. Quantum field stability at 94%. Colonel Rodriguez nodded from the command chair. Dr. Patel, how are the temporal shields holding? They're adapting to the distortions, but every adjustment changes the baseline. It's like trying to surf on a wave that keeps changing its own past. The black hole grew larger in their view screens, a perfect circle of nothing surrounded by twisted spacetime and swirling matter. But it was what they saw around it that left them speechless. Massive structures were taking shape in the void, appearing and disappearing as if caught between moments of time. The temporal distortions are intensifying, Dr. Harrison reported, studying her readings. But there's a pattern to them now. The same sequences we saw in the gravitational waves, but amplified. Transformed. A month into their journey, they encountered the first direct evidence of intelligent design. Geometric shapes began appearing in the accretion disk around the black hole, perfect circles and triangles formed from compressed matter and light. It's a test, Dr. Patel said during an emergency briefing. Each shape corresponds to a fundamental mathematical constant. Pi. Phi. The square root of 2. They're checking if we can understand basic universal principles. Dr. Harrison had been working on a response. Using the quantum drive's field generators, they could create their own patterns in the fabric of spacetime. Simple at first, matching the shapes they were shown, then expanding on them, demonstrating human understanding of mathematics and physics. The response came almost immediately. The black hole's emissions changed, becoming more complex, more directed. New patterns emerged, showing not just shapes but structures, vast machines that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human minds could process. These aren't just blueprints, Dr. Harrison explained to Colonel Rodriguez. They're instructions for building technology that could reshape reality itself. The kind of technology that could create, or move, a black hole. But as they drew closer, the temporal effects grew more severe. Crew members reported seeing versions of themselves from different timelines, paths not taken, choices unmade. The ship's AI struggled to maintain cohesion as multiple versions of its code tried to execute simultaneously. Lieutenant Ibrahim was the first to spot the anomaly, a perfect sphere of distorted space, hovering just outside the ship's temporal shields. Inside it, they could see what looked like a city, but one that followed laws of physics that didn't exist in our universe. It's a sample, Dr. Harrison realized. They're showing us what's possible. What we could become. Colonel Rodriguez ordered the ship to maintain distance, but the sphere followed them, growing larger, more complex. Inside it, the impossible city evolved, changed, lived out countless variations of its own existence. Then came the message, not in waves or patterns this time, but in pure mathematics, numbers that translated themselves in their minds. You have understood the first key. Now prepare for the second. The black hole pulsed, and reality around the horizon began to shift. Beyond the veil. The pulse from the black hole rippled through the horizon, transforming everything it touched. For a moment that stretched into eternity, the crew experienced existence from every possible angle, past, present, and future overlapping in a kaleidoscope of reality. Dr. Harrison found herself surrounded by equations that wrote themselves in light, mathematical proofs that explained not just how the universe worked, but why. The patterns they'd been following weren't just coordinates, they were keys to understanding the fundamental nature of reality itself. Multiple timeline convergence detected, the ship's AI announced, its voice echoing across different versions of itself. Quantum stability at 47% and falling. Colonel Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos. All hands, maintain position. Dr. Patel, status of the temporal shields. They're evolving, he replied, wonder and fear mixing in his voice. The shield harmonics are synchronizing with the black hole's emissions. It's as if they're teaching our technology how to grow. The impossible city they'd observed earlier had multiplied, becoming a network of interconnected spheres, each containing its own version of reality. Through the ship's viewports, they could see massive structures taking shape around the black hole, rings of dark material that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Those rings, Dr. Harrison said, her fingers flying across her console. They're not just controlling the black hole. They're using it as a lens, focusing spacetime itself like a beam of light. Lieutenant Ibrahim's readings confirmed her theory. The rings were generating fields that somehow made the black hole's gravitational pull selective, able to attract or repel specific portions of spacetime. It was technology so advanced it bordered on magic. But it was Dr. Patel who made the breakthrough. The temporal distortions on Earth, they weren't attacks or accidents. They were calibrations. Whoever built this was adjusting our planet's temporal frequency, like tuning a radio to the right channel. A new pattern emerged in the black hole's emissions, more complex than anything they'd seen before. Dr. Harrison worked frantically to decode it, and when she did, her hands began to shake. It's not just a message, she whispered. It's an invitation. The pattern described a precise sequence of quantum field adjustments, modifications to their drive system that would allow the horizon to safely approach the massive rings. But more than that, it promised answers to questions humanity had been asking since it first looked up at the stars. Colonel Rodriguez called an emergency crew meeting. We need to make a decision, she said, looking at each face around the table. Following these instructions means taking an enormous risk. If we're wrong about their intentions, we're already past the point of safe return, Dr. Patel pointed out. The temporal distortions on Earth will continue to worsen unless we find a way to stop them. This might be our only chance. Dr. Harrison studied the equations floating in the air before her. These beings, whoever they are, they've mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. They could have destroyed Earth the moment they arrived. Instead, they've been teaching us, step by step, preparing us for something bigger. The decision was made. Following the provided instructions, they began modifying the horizon's quantum drive. As they worked, the rings around the black hole began to move, realigning themselves into new configurations that defied Euclidean geometry. Race against time. The horizon approached the massive rings, its modified quantum drive humming with new frequencies. The black hole at the center seemed to pulse in response, its event horizon rippling with patterns that mirrored their approach. Quantum field harmonics at 100% synchronization, Lieutenant Ibrahim reported, his voice steady despite the tremendous forces surrounding them. The rings they're acknowledging our presence. The massive structures began to rotate, creating geometric patterns in four-dimensional space. Each rotation brought new revelations, glimpses of other universes, other possibilities, other forms of life that had made this journey before them. Dr. Harrison worked at interpreting the flood of data pouring through their enhanced systems. The rings are part of a network, she announced. They're not just controlling this black hole, they're connecting to others across the galaxy. It's a transportation system. But as they drew closer, alarms blared throughout the ship. Dr. Patel's face went pale as he checked his readings. The temporal distortions on Earth, they're accelerating exponentially. We have less than 48 hours before permanent temporal fracture. Colonel Rodriguez's voice remained calm. Options? The rings, Dr. Harrison said, understanding flowing through her like electricity. They're not just showing us how to travel through space. They're showing us how to stabilize spacetime itself. But we need to decode the final sequence. The next hours were a blur of calculations and adjustments. The crew worked in shifts, their minds enhanced by direct interface with the ship's AI, processing patterns that no human brain was meant to comprehend. Time flowed strangely around them, minutes stretching into hours, hours compressing into seconds. Dr. Patel made the crucial connection. The rings aren't just technology, they're alive. They adapt, they learn, they evolve. And they want us to do the same. The final message came not in mathematics or gravity waves, but in pure understanding. The beings who built this system had transcended traditional existence, becoming one with the fabric of spacetime itself. The black hole network wasn't just for transportation, it was for transformation. They're offering us a choice, Dr. Harrison realized. We can use the rings to redirect the black hole, save Earth, but that's not their real invitation. They want us to join them, to become part of something larger than ourselves. Colonel Rodriguez stood at the viewport, watching the rings dance around them. We're not ready for that. Humanity needs to make this journey at its own pace. Dr. Harrison nodded, entering the final sequence. The rings responded immediately, their movement becoming more purposeful. Energy flowed between them in impossible patterns, and the black hole began to shift, its trajectory bending away from Earth. But they weren't done. Using the knowledge they'd gained, the crew worked to establish a permanent stabilization field around Earth, a shield against temporal distortion that would give humanity time to grow, to learn, to prepare for what awaited them among the stars. As the horizon began its journey home, Dr. Harrison recorded their final message to Earth. We've been given a glimpse of our potential, of what we might become. The beings who built this system didn't want to conquer us, they wanted to prepare us. The black hole wasn't a threat. It was the first step on a longer journey. The stars streaked past as they headed home, but they all knew this was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, ancient beings of pure energy and thought were waiting, ready to welcome humanity when it was finally ready to take its place among the eternal dancers in the cosmic ballet. Lieutenant Ibrahim's console lit up with one final transmission from the rings, a sequence of coordinates, pointing to other nodes in the network. Other black holes. Other gateways. Other chances for humanity to learn and grow. The journey back to Earth would take months, but they had succeeded. They had faced the impossible and found not destruction, but possibility. Not an ending, but a beginning. The black hole receded behind them, now a guardian instead of a threat, waiting patiently for the day humanity would be ready to take its next great leap into the unknown. End.